The sound of machines was the only thing filling the ICU. My mother's chest rose and fell with the help of tubes, her hand cold in mine. That's when my phone buzzed on the chair beside me. I glanced down, expecting another update from my son at college, or maybe a kind word from a friend checking in. Instead, it was from my husband of 25 years. 4 short sentences. Marriage over. I've moved out. The account's empty. Don't contact me. Just like that. 25 years of loyalty, of raising children, of sacrifice, of building a life together. All reduced to a text message while I sat at my mother's deathbed. I remember staring at the screen, reading it over and over, as if maybe I'd misread it. My chest went hollow. Shame, shock, anger, they all collided at once. And in that silence, with monitors beeping around me, I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I reached into my purse and touched the corner of a manila envelope I had been carrying for months. David thought he was ending our story with a text and an empty bank account. He had no idea that envelope in my bag was about to rewrite everything. He thought he had taken everything from me. He had no idea I'd been preparing for this day. My name is Evelyn Carter. I'm 52 years old. For 25 years, I was David's wife. And for every one of those years, I put his needs above my own. I once had a career. Numbers were my strength. Accounting, forensic auditing, detail work that could catch what others missed. But when David said we couldn't afford childcare, I quit my job without hesitation. I told myself it was temporary, that once the kids were older, I would return. But temporary turned into permanent. I raised our 2 children while managing every bill, every dollar, every deadline. While David built his construction company, I built the invisible foundation beneath our lives. When projects failed and debts mounted, it was me on the phone with creditors, me tightening our belts, me turning scraps into something that looked like stability. When he collapsed from exhaustion 10 years ago, I was the one sitting by his hospital bed spoon-feeding him broth. When his father passed, I was the one who comforted him through the nights he couldn't sleep. When his sister fell into debt, I was the one who quietly paid the bills he refused to acknowledge. And now it was my mother in the hospital. My mother, the woman who taught me resilience. I'd been caring for her for months, watching the medical bills stack higher than I dared to count. That was my life, a ledger of sacrifices, unbalanced and unpaid. We had a home with nearly $400,000 in equity, a joint savings of $180,000, money I had budgeted and protected for years. 2 children in college, both relying on me to keep things steady. And now, the crushing reality of my mother's care costs looming like a storm. All of it, every ounce of security, every promise of stability, tied to a man who had just ended 25 years of marriage in a text message. And as I sat there, reading those words, holding my unconscious mother's hand, I finally understood something. Sacrifice does not guarantee security. It only guarantees convenience for the one who takes it. I thought I was building a future with him, but the truth was simpler and far crueler. I was just making his life easier. And now, he thought he could erase mine with 4 sentences.
It didn't happen all at once. Looking back, I can see the cracks forming long before the text message. At first, I told myself it was just age catching up with us. David was 54, restless, talking about rediscovering himself. He joined a gym, bought designer clothes he'd never cared for before, and spent hours on his phone in hushed conversations that ended the moment I walked into the room. When I asked, he'd smile and say, "Business calls, Evelyn. You wouldn't understand." Then came the talk about finances. He told me we needed to simplify things, that it would be easier if everything flowed through one joint account. I didn't realize at the time that simplifying for him meant stripping me of any safety net. It wasn't just the secrecy, it was the cruelty that crept in. He started mocking my appearance, the lines around my eyes, the gray in my hair. Little barbs disguised as jokes meant to make me feel small. At parties, he avoided me. At dinners, he flirted openly with younger women while I sat there, smiling politely, pretending not to notice. He even started leaving brochures for senior care facilities on the kitchen counter. For my mother, who I had promised to keep at home for as long as she had breath in her body. He would tap the glossy covers and say, "She'd be better off there, Evelyn, and so would we." That was the man I had sacrificed everything for.
But the escalation didn't stop there. One evening, while he was in the shower, I was searching for a receipt in his briefcase and found a hotel bill, 2 nights at a downtown suite, a dinner for 2 charged to the room. He had written "work meeting" on the receipt, as though that flimsy lie would shield him from suspicion. I wanted to believe I was wrong, that grief over my mother's illness was clouding my judgment. But then I found the second phone, hidden in the glove compartment of his car, wrapped in a plain handkerchief. The messages were there, waiting for me. Intimate, shameless. Jennifer, 34, his project manager. She was young enough to be our daughter, and yet there she was, promising him a new life, calling him her future, sending him photos I will never be able to unsee. And then came the blow that nearly destroyed me: the finances. The joint account drained overnight. $180,000 gone. The credit cards maxed out. Vacations, jewelry, dinners, all for her. But it didn't end there. While combing through the paperwork, I discovered something far worse. David had secretly refinanced our home, pulling $150,000 in equity out from under me. Our house, the house where I raised our children, where I cared for him through his illnesses, had been leveraged to fund his affair. I thought the affair was the worst betrayal. But what I discovered next made me realize I was in real danger. This wasn't just about betrayal anymore. It was about survival. The night my mother was admitted to the ICU, I thought I had already hit rock bottom, but life still had one more cruelty to throw my way. As I sat at her bedside, watching the machine breathe for her, my phone buzzed. I thought it was one of the doctors with an update. Instead, it was 4 sentences that ended 25 years of my life. Marriage over. I've moved out. The account's empty. Don't contact me. That was it. No explanation. No apology. Not even the courtesy of facing me in person. A 1/4 century reduced to a text message. My hand shook as I logged into our joint bank account. One number glared back at me. $847. That was all I had left in the world. In that sterile hospital room with my mother unconscious beside me and my life collapsing in my hands, I felt something inside me break. But what surprised me most was what came after. The tears didn't last long. Because that night, I stopped being the victim. That's when I remembered the calls I'd been making in secret, the late-night meetings he didn't know about, the envelope I had been carrying in my purse for months, waiting for the right moment. David had forgotten who I was before I became his housewife. He forgot I was once an accountant. And accountants notice everything. He thought he erased me with a text. He didn't realize I'd been preparing for this day all along. 3 months earlier, before the text, before the drained accounts, I had noticed the cracks, little inconsistencies in our finances, receipts that didn't match, transfers I never approved, statements that arrived later than they should have. David always thought I was too busy with the kids and my mother to notice. But the truth? I noticed everything. That's when I quietly made my first call, to a private investigator. I handed him the hotel receipt I had found in his briefcase, and within a week, I had photographs. David and Jennifer, hand in hand, checking into hotels, sharing dinners, whispering into each other's ears like newlyweds. But that was just the surface. The PI gave me something even more valuable, the confidence to dig deeper. So, I did what I used to do best. I pored over our accounts like I was auditing a company, and that's when I found the real betrayal. Not just the affair, not just the spending, but evidence that David was embezzling money from his own construction business. He was funneling company funds into private accounts Jennifer had access to. And then came the discovery that sealed his fate. Tax fraud. Years of it. False filings, hidden income, risky deductions, patterns so obvious that I couldn't believe the IRS hadn't caught them yet. I knew then I wasn't just dealing with a cheating husband. I was dealing with a criminal. I started documenting everything. Every transfer, every fraudulent claim, every text message. I made copies of bank records, photographed receipts, and built a timeline that stretched back years. And I didn't stop there. I consulted a divorce lawyer who specialized in financial misconduct and a forensic accountant who confirmed what I suspected. David wasn't just hiding money from me. He was hiding money from the government. That's when I put it all together into one small manila envelope. Inside were photographs from the PI, bank records, tax documents, and most importantly, pre-filed divorce papers with emergency asset protection orders. The kind that freeze accounts, that stop transfers, that make it impossible for someone like David to vanish with what isn't his. While David was busy planning his new life with Jennifer, I was building the case that would dismantle his. Every smile he gave her, every boastful word he said to his colleagues, every arrogant dismissal he threw my way only made me more patient, because I knew his downfall wasn't a question of if. It was only a matter of when. The morning after his text, David expected silence. He thought I'd crawl away, broken, begging for scraps, while he played house with his project manager. Instead, by 9 a.m., my attorney filed the paperwork I'd been holding in that envelope. By noon, the emergency asset protection orders had gone through. Every joint account froze. Every line of credit froze. And most importantly, every business account under David's name froze. At 2 p.m., his partners received notice that an IRS audit had been triggered. The evidence I had been compiling wasn't just enough for divorce court. It was enough to interest the federal government. That same evening, David swaggered into his office with Jennifer on his arm, ready to play the big man. But instead of admiring glances, he was met with silence. His partners had already seen the letters. Their accounts were seized. Their contracts were on hold. His empire wasn't just cracking, it was collapsing. Jennifer panicked first. The thrill of sneaking around was one thing, but being tied to a man facing embezzlement, fraud, and tax evasion, that was a future she didn't sign up for. By the end of the week, she packed her things, left his apartment, and cut all contact. Then came his partners. Men who once toasted him with whiskey and cigars now refused to take his calls. With no access to company funds, they couldn't afford loyalty. And when David finally understood what he was facing, he did what every guilty man does. He hired a criminal defense attorney. A good one.
the kind who charges $1,000 an hour and demands payment up front. Within weeks, that attorney had drained what little David had left. By the time the IRS investigators arrived, David was no longer the man in charge. He was just another middle-aged man in debt, betrayed by the people he thought would stand by him. And then came the call. My phone lit up with his name. After weeks of silence, David finally reached out. I answered. I wanted to hear his voice when he realized just how completely I had dismantled him. His voice wasn't the confident, booming one I remembered. It was hoarse, almost trembling. "Evelyn, you've ruined everything." I let the silence hang. Then, with a calmness that surprised even me, I answered. "No, David, you ruined everything. I just made sure you couldn't ruin me, too." And with that, I hung up. That was the last time I ever spoke to him.
The legal battle stretched for months. David tried everything: delays, denials, blaming Jennifer, blaming me, but the documents didn't lie. When the judge delivered the ruling, it wasn't just a win, it was justice. I was awarded the majority of our assets. The family home, the one I thought I'd lose, remained mine. The equity in it secured my children's education, and the court ensured a trust would cover my mother's medical care. David left the courtroom that day with nothing but debt, legal fees, and a reputation in ruins. The man who thought he could discard me with a single text message was now the one discarded by his business partners, his mistress, and the very system he had once thought he could outsmart. But here's the truth. Revenge wasn't the ending. It was the beginning. With my settlement secured, I didn't crawl back into obscurity. I rebuilt. I restarted my career, this time in forensic accounting. I used the very skills that David underestimated to help other women uncover hidden assets in their divorces. I became the person I once needed. My children stood by me through it all, and they thrived. And when the time came, I moved my mother into my home. She wasn't a burden. She was my anchor, my reminder of strength and sacrifice. For years, I thought sacrifice meant being silent. I thought standing by meant losing myself. But I learned something David never could. Strength isn't about control or intimidation. It's about surviving the storm and learning to dance in the rain it leaves behind. I didn't just win in court, I reclaimed myself. And every morning when I wake up in the home he thought he'd take from me, I remember the day he texted me that it was over. He was right. It was over. But what he never understood was that my life wasn't ending that day. It was just beginning.
David thought 25 years of marriage meant I would never fight back, that I would crumble under humiliation, that I would settle for scraps. What he forgot is that 25 years also meant I knew every single one of his weaknesses, his pride, his greed, his carelessness. And when he chose betrayal, I chose preparation. That little envelope I carried into the ICU wasn't just paper. It was proof that I was not blind and I was not broken. It was the line between being his victim and becoming his reckoning. And in the end, it wasn't about destroying David. It was about reclaiming Evelyn Carter. Sometimes, the greatest revenge isn't what you take away from someone. It's what you refuse to let them take from you. So I'll ask you this. If you were in my place, what would you have done? Would you have confronted him face to face the moment you suspected? Or would you have stayed quiet, watching and waiting, building your case, piece by piece, until the moment came when he had no way out? Be honest, because the answer says a lot about who you really are.